by Senator Francis. Senator Stewart Olsen.
Thank you, Chair. My question is for Mr. Lafond. I reviewed the clause by clause in the House Commons Committee, and I was struck by the fact that amendments that were brought forward for the operative part of the bill were rejected by government members, but accepted and put into the preamble. So for example, the amendment to recognize treaty rights is not frozen, but capable of growth and evolution. And I would note that as well, the preamble is an interpretive tool and carries no force in law. Does this concern you that the government's not committed to clarifying amendments that have been endorsed by courts in the operative part of the bill? And I raise this with you because I'm concerned with this bill is raising a lot of expectations that it then refused to put in the bill.
Thank you very much for the question there, Senator. And I think that's consistent with, I think you've nailed our concerns in our written submissions squarely within what we were trying to convey. And so, I mean, as you're aware, international law is extraordinarily complex. For the average person and myself, being a lawyer practicing in corporate commercial law and jurisdictional law and constitutional law for just over 12 years, have myself a very significant amount of difficulty when you go into the international law realm. It's a very nuanced area, and there's a lot of language and a lot of precedents there that you'll have to digest in a short period of time if you want to take on something of this nature. When you get into this area, I mean, we know that UNDRIP is not an international accord. We know it's not a convention. It's a declaration, but we also know that Parliament has the ability and has the authority to implement the terms of international declarations into domestic law to make them valid and binding. Now, and it's not to say that there aren't provisions within UNDRIP right now that aren't already binding. Just by their nature, there are a few provisions within UNDRIP that we can walk through, which are simply repetitive of earlier commitments regarding human rights, which are reflected in Canadian law. However, there are a lot of provisions within UNDRIP that are not currently legally binding on federal lawmakers. And so the process is what we're concerned with in this case. The process of implementing the law needs to be clearly and unequivocally set out in the legislation that provides for the implementation. And it's in this regard curious as to why Canada has fallen short of other instruments where they've taken non-binding international covenants and tried to implement them in Canada, where the language in those statutes is unequivocal. When you look at the language, it's almost as if the federal government or Parliament in this case, in drafting the legislation, has danced around some pretty clear objectives, which is implementing UNDRIP. And again,
thank you, Mr. Lafond.